Good afternoon and welcome to Emsi Webinars. Today we're going to be discussing how labour market intelligence can identify your local and regional strengths. Obviously this will be expanded by our presenters today, who is John Gray, who is our Director of Further Education here at Emsi, and also we have a guest speaker, William, or Will as he likes to be called, Cookson, who is our Director of Economic Development. Great to have you with us, guys. Just to say, if you have any questions during the course of the webinar, please remember to put them in the questions box on your control panel. We will attempt to get to those at the end of the presentation. So without any further ado, I'd hand over to John. Good afternoon, John.
Afternoon, Debbie, and thanks for that. Well, welcome everybody to today's webinar. As Debbie said, we're going to be looking at how to identify local and regional strengths, and I'm delighted to be joined by Will, who's our expert in this area. So firstly, a couple of housekeeping rules. Debbie's already mentioned, if you've got questions, please feel free to ask those at any point or wait until the end. You're more than welcome to do that. We hope the webinar will take around 30 minutes, so we'll try and keep it relatively short. We appreciate just how busy everybody is, but you know, really value you joining in today to find out more. So just before we start off, the tool that we're going to be looking at today, StrengthsFinder, is part of our analyst product, and some of you on the call will have no doubt got the analyst product. If you don't have the StrengthsFinder tool activated within there, then just let us know and we can do that after the webinar is finished. So we're just going to have a quick look at the agenda, and then I'm going to tell those of you who are not familiar with Emsi a little bit more about the business, and then we're going to move on into today's presentation. So firstly, as I said, I'm just going to touch base on a little bit about Emsi for those of you who may be new to us, and then Will's going to talk us through the StrengthsFinder tool and really get into what underpins StrengthsFinder, how to use the tool, and then we're going to finish off with some questions and the potential applications of the tool. So first up, just to tell you a little bit about Emsi, our mission is to use data to drive economic prosperity. So by that, what we're trying to really do is unite the three stakeholders there that you'll see on screen: people, education, and employers, with really robust labour market data, and in particular, as we develop our tools, that has a real emphasis there in the where the diagram overlaps in terms of skills data. So Emsi is an American company. We have our base in the UK, in Basingstoke, and we predominantly work across the industries set out there on your screen. So education, so work across further and higher education organisations, economic developments, that's things like local enterprise partnerships, and that's the area of the business which Will specialises in, and then more and more now we're getting involved with larger employment organisations and recruitment agencies. So we're there based in Basingstoke, and we offer products across software, API, so data integration and consulting services. In the US, we're based out in Idaho, and we are part of the Strada Education Network. We have global expertise in labour market information and work with a number of organisations now across the globe. So that's all for me for now. I'm going to hand over to Will, who's going to talk us through the StrengthsFinder tool and how to identify strengths in your local area. Over to you, Will.
Thanks, John. Welcome all. Yes, let's start. Why would it be important for you to understand what strengths you have in your local economy from the perspective of a skills provider? Well, to succeed, you need to be able to understand what is unique to your local area, and you can think of that purely in terms of curriculum planning, but you can also think of that in terms of the engagement that you have with employers. You can think of the way in which you work with your local stakeholders. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the StrengthsFinder tool and share how that can put a spotlight on what makes your area different in terms of the industry makeup, and obviously identifying potential growth opportunities for your organisations and for the wider local economy, and also to look at how that insight can be used to target interventions and inform your planning. So without further ado, how does this StrengthsFinder help? Well, essentially what we've got is we've got very granular data in regards to industries and occupations. So for those of you that are already using our tools, we've got standard industry classifications at 4-digit level. That means you've got approximately about 560 industries that are classified for any local authority area. What we found is that can be quite confusing. If you're trying to get a view of where your strengths lie, you probably need a higher level view. So what we did is we took some existing methodology, which had been developed at Harvard University in the States, and we essentially created industry clusters. And we did that so that you can get a higher level view of economic clusters or sectors in your area. And then what we do is we bring in comparisons to the national picture, to the regional picture, or to neighbouring areas. We also look at the supply chains that sit below those sectors and what's supporting them. We can home in on key occupations, and what we're trying to do is help you to be able to understand where there are opportunities for growth within your area. So as I said, we start with 560 plus industries at the 4-digit SIC level. What we then do is we look at, we've analysed whether those industries are local or tradable. Now this is a key distinction, and I'll explain this in more detail when we look at the tool itself. But essentially, the key distinction here is, do the industries within that cluster do the industries, do they provide a product or service that's consumed locally? So a good example would be health and care or education. Or do they export that service or product out of area as well as it being consumed locally? So are they essentially trading and exporting that product or service out of area? When we looked at grouping them together, we also looked at whether those industries co-locate. Do they have employment in the same places? Are they using the same workforce? Do industries rely on the same sorts of occupations? And are they interacting within each other's supply chain? Are they buying and selling to each other? Using those measures, we can take those 560 plus industries and we can get down to 49 clusters. So here is the list of the 49 clusters. The ones in green are local clusters, so those will be really large employers, really important to you, but they won't be necessarily driving economic growth in the way that the tradable clusters, which is the much bigger list in black, they will be real drivers of economic growth, really important to your GVA, which is very important from a LEP perspective, but also interesting in terms of thinking of where there's growth in your economy that you can tap into in regards to targeting your provision. Okay, I'm going to just talk through this briefly, but we'll talk through it in more detail when we have a look at the tool itself. Essentially, StrengthsFinder is a bubble chart and it has a graph. We can see the graph here. On the x-axis going across, we're looking at location quotient, or LQ. Now, location quotient is a way of understanding how concentrated a particular industry or a cluster of industries is in an area compared to the national average. Now, that national average will be 1. You'll see 1 on there. You'll see also the vertical line there. That's a 1.2. Anything beyond 1.2 means that you have a comparative advantage. You've got more of that. You've got more of a presence of that industry cluster in your area than you would find on the national average. So it's what makes your area different. On the y-axis, we're looking at national growth, and that will be set to whatever time frame we set within the tool itself. Now you'll see that there's 4 quadrants and 3 with names. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail, because now what I'm going to do is seamlessly try and switch it over to our tool. So bear with me 1 second, and it should
So Will, while you were just doing that and transitioning over to the tool, just to kind of reflect on a couple of conversations that I've had with colleges in the last few weeks as we've been undertaking work around curriculum planning, I think it's really important and opportune timing to look at this tool, particularly as colleges are starting to think broader about how they start to plan, and broader than just curriculum planning, but introducing this into their strategic plans and how they engage with strategic partners within the region as well. So a great timing that we're looking at this tool, and hopefully that might generate some questions as we get towards the end of the presentation. But I'll hand back over now and just let you you talk through this.
Okay, so this is the landing page for StrengthsFinder within our analyst tool. What I'm going to do here, you can obviously look, it's pretty self-explanatory. You can either explore all of the clusters in your area, or you can hone in on one in particular. We're going to have a look at what clusters they have, or what presence of industry clusters they have, and we're going to pick Basingstoke because that's where our head office is. So here we are. I'm hoping you're all able to see all of this. Yes. Okay. Essentially, this is the graph that we looked at on the PowerPoint slide. You'll see that there's a number of filters on this side. We can set timeframes going back to 2003 and going forward to 2027. That will be 2028 from next year. So we're going to look at recent data. We're going to look over the last couple of years, and we're looking at Basingstoke. Now, all of these green bubbles are tradable industries. Each of the bubble is sized based on the number of jobs that sit within that cluster of industries. And you'll remember that I mentioned location quotient going across here, and anything beyond 1.2, where this line here is, it means that they've got a comparative advantage. What you can then do is you can hover over any of the local or tradable industries. So we're looking at a tradable industry here, downstream chemical, and you'll get a number of metrics there. So you get a high level metrics in regards to the total number of jobs based on the year that we've set, the location quotient, which is 2.27. So there's almost twice the amount you would expect to find on average nationally of this particular cluster or sector. The average wages, national job growth over the time frame that we've set over there on the left hand side, and also GVA and the percentage of the total GVA for this area. Obviously it's Basingstoke and Deane that we're looking at. Now generally people hone in on one which is a strength and which seems to hold a large number of jobs, i.e. it's a big bubble. So let's have a look at digital. There, as we've seen before, they're the key metrics. So they've got a location quotient of 1.6. So comparatively, they've got a large presence of those industries. Then what we can do is we can click on that and we can have a look at an overview of this cluster. Now, it's worth saying that everything can be exported as a PDF. The table that we looked at originally can also be exported as an Excel spreadsheet. So everything can be taken away and used, and obviously you can clip content as you see fit. Obviously, key metrics here, we've got 4,714 jobs based on 2018 data. And that's 62% above the national average. So a large number of people employed within this industry cluster. Saying that, there's been some decline, whereas nationally there's been growth. What we have found with the digital sector, that growth has been very concentrated. Average wages there are higher than the national average, but Basingstoke is based in the southeast, so that will be likely to be the case because they will be competing with areas like Reading and London. What we're looking at here now is regional trends. Now, where it says region, think of area. So here, region means Basingstoke and Deane Council rather than the government office region. I have added Hampshire County Council in there as a comparator, and I've also added in their LEP as a comparator. So this dark line here is Basingstoke and Dean, and this is looking at percentage change in regards to jobs over that whole time frame that we've got from 2023 through to 2018, and where these lines go dotted, that's where we're using our projections, which are trend-based projections, where we look back over the last 3, 5 and 8 years. So we make projections going forward. You'll notice that the projections are less spiky. That's because it's more of a essentially looking at those trends, what's happened, and then drawing a line through it. Slightly more conservative than what might happen if suddenly a large employer moves into the area. What you'll see though is that Basingstoke and Dean have had growth, but at present there's been this decline, probably a large employer moving out of the area. And then what you can see is that the national picture in terms of percentage change just continues to grow. Obviously you can look at those changes there in terms of actual job numbers and percentage change, and obviously you can add in any area that you wanted to. So for example, we could add in Reading, and then that will refresh and you will be able to see that Reading is here on a steadier line, but yeah, in terms of the job numbers, really significant. As we go down, this here is drawn from our input-output model, and what we're looking at is aggregate changes. So what we're looking at is essentially every cluster will have a jobs multiplier. So this is saying if we're able to create more jobs within this sector or cluster, then it will create, what impact will that have on the wider economy? So for every 100 jobs in this sector, it's going to create an additional 25, so 125 jobs in total within the wider local economy. We can also look at that in regards to wages and what that would generate in annual wages in the wider local economy. All really important from an economic development perspective, but it also gives you an idea of which sectors have that impact on the wider community. Here we get into industry requirements. I won't spend long on this, but essentially what we're looking at, when it says in region, we mean in area. So within Basingstoke and Dean, these are the, using our input-output model, we're looking at what purchases are made by this sector in area and imported from out of area. And that could be from anywhere in the national or international. And then you can look at the total purchases. This is useful for understanding how important these sectors are in regards to wider activity within supply chains that you'll hold locally. Top 10 occupations employed by this industry, absolutely key from a skills perspective. So who are the largest, what are the largest number of occupations within the sector? And what's the percentage of that in regards to the total industry group? And obviously you can click through there and you'll get through to an occupation overview. So very similar way of looking at, so analyst users will be familiar with that, but quite useful in itself just to understand which occupations are being employed. As we go down, you've got GVA here. And then we get right down to the bottom, and what we can see here is we started with that high level view. So we looked at clusters, 49 clusters, but within that, those 49 clusters are made up of 4-digit industries. Here we have the 4-digit industries, so you can actually see which industry is driving the growth or the presence of that cluster in your local area. And you can see here significantly, there's a lot in regards to telecommunications, and there's also quite a lot in regards to computer consultancy activities. So what you can then do is you could click on the telecommunications ones that we've got here, and you could jump through and you can then look at that in terms of an industry overview. You can obviously look at them singly. I've grouped 3 together here because they're all related. And you can see here that really is driving the growth. So in this comparison, in terms of regional trends, you can see that Basingstoke has a number of a real presence in regards to telecommunications. We know from working there, Vodafone are based within the area, so it's not that surprising. From a local perspective, though, it does present a challenge because telecommunications isn't necessarily It's important, but it isn't necessarily the breadth of industries that you can draw in if you have a really large presence in regards to the digital sector. But interesting all the same. As you can see there, interestingly, Reading have far less. In terms of the overview, top 5 occupations in regards to these industries or the individual industry, and also gender breakdown and age breakdown. Age breakdown's useful, obviously, from a skills perspective. Obviously, if there's a younger workforce coming in there, are they getting the vocational training that they need to be able to progress within that career or to enter those jobs? That really is a very snapshot view of what you can do with StrengthsFinder. I'm going to go back, bear with me while I click back through. And what you should see is don't want to go too far. And then where we end up is back on that view. As I mentioned before, real big distinction here between local industries and tradable industries. So some really large employers here that are providing a service that's consumed locally, and they will often grow or contract based on the demographic needs. Health and care jumps out there. And then obviously if we're interested in that, we can jump in and we can look again at the overview of that cluster, and you can look compared to the national and so on and so forth. So I hope that's given you a snapshot view of what StrengthsFinder can be used for. We will now seamlessly go back to the presentation. Bear with me 1 second. There, we're back on the presentation. And what I wanted to say was that there are, well, first of all, are there any questions is what I wanted to say. I'm just going to have a quick look now.
Well, we've got a gentleman that just asked about the StrengthsFinder tool on their particular Emsi account and how they could find it, or whether or not they have it, I presume. So,
yeah, I think that goes back to the point John made earlier. It is there. It might not have been switched on. Do drop us an email, either through to John or through to customer support, and we can switch that on. Just really important to say as well, all of the information and things that I talked about today is all available within Knowledge Base. So you can have a look at that, and I believe there's a short tutorial video on there as well. So if you need a refresher, once you do have access to it, all the information should be there.
That's great. Will, thanks ever so much for that. It's really insightful demonstration, and certainly looking at the industries by clusters is a really useful way to analyze the data in a different way to the standard industry classification codes which we tend to look at. Just one quick question from me, if we could. And I think we've got another question come through from one of our attendees.
Yeah, just pick that up.
Yeah, if you could just explain a little bit about the opportunities quadrant on the graph, and just highlight, the importance of that quadrant and what that might mean in terms of identifying opportunities.
Sure, will do. Okay, I'm going to. You probably can't. Yeah. Okay. Essentially, opportunities, particularly if they're near to that vertical grey line, the vertical line that we've got going up there. What we tend to do is to say to focus on sectors that we can see in the top half of the graph. So they're growing and projected to grow nationally. And then to see, okay, is there an opportunity there to put in place interventions to support further growth within that cluster? Obviously, there's a role there for local authorities with their economic development teams in regards to inward investment inquiries, business attraction strategies. Also, local enterprise partnerships play a role in that. From a skills provider point of view, are there opportunities to put in place vocational training offers that can support those employers and allow them to grow their workforce. Looking at things like apprenticeship opportunities would be an obvious starting point for some of those clusters. But yeah, opportunities, essentially we say focus on the ones that either you already have comparative advantage in which are going to be open that top right quadrant as a strength, or focus on the ones that you know are growing nationally, and then it's could we do put in place particular interventions to support those industries to grow further. And obviously there's an employer engagement angle to that as well. John, I've just seen there's a further question. How is the data collected and how often is it updated? All of our data is updated annually at the beginning of the year. So we'll have a new data set that will be in place and with customers by the end of January 2020 or 2020. How is the data collected? Essentially what we're going back to here is the data that underpins StrengthsFinder is the same data that's within our StrengthsFinder tool. So we go to a number of different sources, ONS being absolutely key. There's some supporting information I can provide on that if you want to reach out to myself or John. But essentially what we're doing is we're modelling structural government sources of data. We're not drawing on job posting analytics. So this isn't about recruitment activity in your area. This is about essentially the reporting that employers and industries are making in regards to the number of people that are employing. And obviously we cross-reference that to our occupations data as well. But yeah, there's more information I can share on that. But I suppose the reassuring thing is it's not, it is structural data, and it is the same data set that you would be using if you're using Analyst or Course Vision to support your curriculum planning activity. I'm just going to move.
Will, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm just going to move on just to talk about potential applications. As you can see, StrengthsFinder can be used to understand what makes your area different in terms of the local economy, what comparative advantages you may have in terms of the presence of sectors or clusters. Also a way to identify opportunities to move away from generic priority sectors. We're working currently with a third of LEPs. Often you will see very similar sectors being called out as priorities. Often there's a very good reason for that. I think this allows you to question that at a very local level and understand where you sit in regards to sector presence. And there may well be a particular industry that's critical to your local economy and also critical to your business as a college or training provider. It provides evidence to show how you're being responsive, and by that I think what John alluded to this earlier on, I think there's a role for skills providers to play in regards to really showing how they are being responsive to the needs of the local economy. Having that high level view and understanding where there's growth at a sector level is quite powerful in regards to conversations with Ofsted, but also with other stakeholders. As we've talked about, there's a way in which StrengthsFinder can be used to identify opportunities for growth in the economy in the first instance, but also in terms of growth opportunities for your provision in regards to how it responds to those needs at a sector level or an industry level. And finally, it can inform discussions with local stakeholders. Obviously, I've already mentioned LEPs and local authorities, but there'll also be employers that you're engaged with that will be interested in where their sector sits locally. So yeah, I think that's a starting point. There are many other ways in which it can be used. I think most importantly, what I'd suggest you take away is it can be used for setting the context of your understanding of your local economy.
That's brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Will, for again that insightful and really interesting presentation today. Thank you to everybody for joining in. Before we finish off, I just wanted to make you aware that we are now taking bookings for our national conference. The event was fantastic last year, and we had some fantastic feedback. So looking forward to seeing many of you there this year. So the information is there on the screen. You can find more information on our website. We also just have a few places left now at our FE Insight events in January and February, which are taking place in Birmingham and Manchester. Again, you can get information on the website and get one of the last places there. So again, thank you to everybody for joining in. If you want any more information about StrengthsFinder or anything else within any of our products, then please get in touch, and myself or Will will be happy to help, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.